This conference will now be recorded.
And then let's move this along quickly. Ian, let's get started.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You've got the agenda in front of you. If you could just read the declaration, or would you prefer me to do it?
Go ahead.
Okay. Due to the nature of the declaration of a state of emergency due to the novel coronavirus COVID-19 pursuant to Code 2.2-3708-2, this meeting is to be held by electronic communications via the web platform GoToMeeting. The catastrophic nature of this declared emergency makes it impractical and unsafe to assemble a quorum in a single location, and the purpose of this meeting is to discuss or transact the business statutorily required or necessary to continue operations of the public body. A video recording of the meeting will be posted to the FAMPO Policy Committee webpage. Okay, over to you, Mr. Chair.
Do we have, we'll call the meeting to order. Well, let me make sure it's quorum.
I know, do we have a quorum? This is gonna.
We have more than a quorum, but the roll call will be done by Mrs. Stacey Fines. Mr. Chair, if we could ask her to do the roll call, and then she'll check the attendance register. Stacey, if you could do that.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, great. From Stafford County, Miss Cindy Shelton.
On her way.
Mark Dudenheffer.
Here.
Crystal Vanucci.
Here.
Meg Baumke.
Here.
Thomas Cohen. From Spotsylvania County, Tim McLaughlin.
Here.
Chris Yakubowski.
Here.
David Ross.
Here.
Kevin Marshall. Deborah Frazier. Gary Skinner. From the city of Fredericksburg, Matthew Kelly.
Here.
Jason Graham.
Here.
Tim Baruti.
Here.
Doug Fawcett. Mark Whitley. From King George County, Kathy Binder.
Here.
Ann Kupka.
Here.
From Caroline County, Jeffrey Seeley. Jeffrey Black. From FTA, Tanya Holland. From Federal Highway, Richard Duran. From Fred Transit, Jamie Jackson.
Here.
Aiden Quirk. From PRTC, Bob Schneider. Joe Stainsby.
Present.
Betsy Massey. A representative from the Secretary of Transportation, Marcy Parker.
Here.
Michelle Shropshire. From VDOT, Susan Gardner.
Here.
Stephen Haynes.
Here.
From DRPT, Todd Horsley. Sierra Williams. From the Citizens Transportation Advisory Committee, David McLaughlin.
Here.
Al Durante. And from the CTB, Cedric Rucker. We do have a quorum present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Next item. Approval of the May 20 policy agenda.
So moved.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Do we have any comment?
I would like to table until our next meeting, item 9, hotel, just so our staff can get more input on that.
Which one on
This is
that,
just
sorry?
approval of the minutes, right?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Approve the agenda.
agenda.
I'm sorry.
9 hotel, H.
9H, the CMAC.
So defer until the next meeting.
Yeah, and my understanding is deferring it will not impact anything. So you can correct me on that.
So, Mr. Chair, there are, in the presentation, 2 items that are small amounts of money, which we do need to approve today, and we'll show you that in the presentation. The one is for $34,000. The other one is for about $86,000. Both of those items are time sensitive because it's money that is left over from closeout of projects that are now complete.
What item is that?
It's item 9H, H for hotel, the CMAC allocation.
No, I think he's saying there's some item inside of that brief.
So there are 2 items inside of that, which are small amounts of money, but which if we don't approve them before the 1st of June, because they're little bits left over from prior projects, we'll lose them. So don't be,
Why do we really, it sounds like it's rollover money. Is that what it is?
it's money which will not be rolled over. It's money which we must allocate to another project. Otherwise we'll lose it because it's not new money. It's very old money. And it's small amounts. It's not large amounts.
So you could request a table, all except those 2 items.
Okay, I'll do that.
It's the CMAC, it's just for everybody's awareness, it's the CMAC allocations which the TAC recommended but not unanimously. So that's the item we're talking about.
Let's go.
Well, why don't we set the discussion, if after the discussion,
Well, I think
the information, we can table it at that point, because we got to bring up these issues anyway.
Well, these 2 issues we've discussed, but as you mentioned in the last meeting, is you're bringing something to our attention for the first time to discuss, expecting to vote on. And that was one of your big complaints at the last meeting we just had. So we have the same issue right here where it's been requested because there were some changes to the process or how it was allocated or whatever the questions came
Well, then we
up.
can talk about that during.
But we're not going to vote. That's the question that Mr. Ross wants to table it. If there are 2 items within that H that need to be voted on because of a specific issue, let's pull those 2 items specifically out and table the rest. And that's his motion.
I would at least like to have hear from staff on why, what the changes were, because my understanding is we all agreed to a process for the CMAC allocation. And this is basically going back on something we all agreed on already.
Mr. Kelly, that's exactly right. I understand that the process wasn't followed to what the order was. So that's why there needs to be a discussion and we need to have time to look at it. That's why it's too critical. The 9H is not critical. Those 2 specific ones that, again, as of today, this is the first we heard that these 2 items are critical. Okay. So that's a little frustrating, but there's a motion or there's a request. I guess are you making a substitute motion?
No, well, yeah,
You're asking the table.
just table everything except the 2 items that Ian said were time sensitive, the 34,000 and 86,000. I believe that the vote was all 6 reps from Stafford and Spotsylvania voted against this coming forward.
So are you talking about the TAC?
On the TAC.
So at the TAC, only Spotsylvania voted against.
That was it.
Okay.
So all other jurisdictions and the state reps voted in favor.
Really, kind of a point of order. I don't think I've ever heard of pulling an item off the agenda from the start. I mean, especially if it's something that should be heard in the pieces of it. Why wouldn't we get to it and then have the debate and then table the vote and a resolution?
Sure. I'll withdraw it and we can do that because it sounds like I anyway. I was just
No,
trying to.
I'm not necessarily
I was just trying to make it.
against it, I just,
Maybe not along
to
the
me,
time.
that's
So what we wanted to bring up was there obviously were some discussion, there were some issues within the county, our Spotsylvania county staff in this process. And for it to be brought up and voted on today,
I'm not saying we should vote on it, I just think we keep it on
and as
the
Mr.
agenda.
Kelly said as well, it's a good opportunity to discuss it. And we'll hope that you will help us table it over those 2 items.
Is tabling the right word? I'm not
It's
sure
deferred.
tabling.
Table is not.
Table.
So I think your board might operate different than us, but we table things.
Okay.
But you have to have a specific
Robert's
date.
Robert's rules of order, then we would have to remove it from the table and it wouldn't necessarily be on the agenda.
So we just operate
Yeah.
differently. I think we're under Roberts too, but for 10 years.
All right, so
For the next
with
meeting.
that, we have a motion and a second.
Mr. Chair, the only other item is because the chairperson is going to be late, her chair comments, if we could defer those to whenever she is here. Other than that, the agenda will sit quite right.
All right, call the question. Any more discussion?
Who seconded the motion?
You
I
did.
think you did.
What, this one?
No,
Deferred?
no,
No,
no.
it's not.
The main motion
He
is on the
withdrew
floor.
it.
He
We're
withdrew.
we're gonna go to it and then we'll vote.
Okay.
Boy,
We're not discussing that.
the precursor
All right,
of the
that's fine.
meeting.
Any other discussion? All right, hearing none, call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed, announce yourself online.
Aye.
Who was that?
Meg,
I think it was made.
so Meg is opposed?
But
No, I said I
Anybody
voted in
opposed?
favor.
Correct. Does anybody oppose the motion? Hearing none, the motion passes. All right, public involvement?
Stacy, are you aware of anything that has come in subsequent to our discussion? Stacey?
We do not have any comments to read for the public involvement for the next item, public hearing. We will. And I just asked the chair to check to see if we have anyone on the line who would like to give a verbal comment.
We're on 4, we'll get to that.
We're on 4, right? Is there any public involvement, anybody online that would like to speak? Hearing none, we'll move on. Under public hearing?
These are the public hearings, Mr. Chair, for the draft 2045 LRTP amendment, the unified, the UPWP 22, the Transportation Improvement Program amendment, and the draft Community Engagement Equity Plan. If there's any public comment at this time. And Stacey, did you say there were comments received?
Yes, I have 2 comments to read to you.
Before you read, are we taking, is this one public hearing for all?
We're doing a public hearing jointly for these 4 items.
4 items?
So
Okay.
save yourself some time by putting them all together tonight.
People are knocking down the door.
So for that, I guess we'll open the public hearing at this point. Are there any comments?
Stacey, if you could read the written comments received.
Sure. From Andrew Coleman, a resident of the city of Fredericksburg. He would like to voice his support for the following proposed amendments included in the 2045 LRTP for Lafayette Boulevard improvements and widening, for Tidewater Trail widening. And he writes that I currently live in the Browns neighborhood on Lafayette Boulevard, and getting in and out can be difficult depending on the time of day due to traffic congestion. It's also not safe for pedestrians if they wish to walk or bike along that route. Please consider making this project a priority moving forward. I also frequent Tidewater Trail, which also suffers from traffic congestion on a daily basis. That's from Andrew Coleman, resident of the city of Fredericksburg, regarding the LRTP amendments. Regarding the TIP amendment, we have 1 public comment received from Jennifer Faulkner of Healthy Generations. She writes, we support the inclusion of the Rappahannock Area Community Services Board's transportation project in the local TIP and are proud to partner with an organization that does so much for our community. Thanks to Clark for providing a great overview of the transportation needs of individuals involved in the Rappahannock Area Community Service Board program on the FAMPO Facebook live stream today. And again, that's in support for the TIP amendment, specifically the Rappahannock Area Community Services Board Paratransit Project. That concludes the comments we've received.
Are there any comments from anyone online? Okay. Hearing none, we'll close the public comment period. Is there any discussion on the projects?
The discussion will be held later on as they come up in the agenda. No need to discuss them now.
Chair, I'll move the consent agenda.
Yeah.
I'll move the consent agenda.
So we have a motion to approve. Is there a second on the consent?
Second,
Any opposed? All right.
It was the
Any
second.
comment? Second.
I was.
Ms. Van Nuys is the second. Thank you.
Is there any comment or questions on the consent agenda? Okay, all those in favor, state aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, state your name that you're opposed. Any abstentions, state your name that you abstain.
Meg Bomke, I'm abstaining. I was not in attendance at the meeting.
Is there anyone else? Okay, motion carries. We'll defer the chair comments.
Thank you. Thank you. Administrative report. I would just request members if you could hold your comments to the end because I want to try and get through the slides quickly. Feel free to ask any comments at the end. They're not a huge, long presentation. Okay, thank you. Next slide. Next slide. Next one. There we go. Roads. In your pack today, there's a letter to do with the CTB spring consultations, talking about the I-95, specifically between Route 130 and 126. If implemented, this will deal with the concern that I've heard from many members about the bottleneck that may occur once all the other upgrades are done slightly further down the road. The chairperson has already made those comments at the CTB, but there's a letter in the pack just to reaffirm that already. The I-95 corridor, and this is just a point from my point of view, it represents an economic and security risk for the state. And what I mean by that is that we need viable alternative routes should the I-95 become blocked. We're spending a lot of time upgrading the I-95, and that's the right thing to do. However, let's not forget that every time the I-95 blocks, the alternatives not being good alternatives are exposed. And I think we need to think about that. So examples of things that we should do: take the rail upgrade seriously, increase the commuter bus program like OmniRide, reduce traffic lights on Route 1. That's one of the things that is a problem because you shut the traffic off the I-95, Route 1 can't handle it. There are too many stop and go situations. Identify roads which can be upgraded in future and continue to develop van pooling, carpooling, slugging. We need to support all of these things, particularly looking for alternatives to the I-95, because when it blocks, when there's a fire, a truck smashes, and there's a chemical fire, you wreck the economy for days. It's a risk we should be aware of. Next. For the CTB, the 6-year improvement program was published at their recent meeting. FAMPO was allocated the $59,100 in grant funding towards the East-West mobility study. This is only for transit. We're not allowed to use it for anything other than transit. But we're grateful for that allocation in the SIP. It really helps us with the study. The chairperson, as I said, made those comments at the CTB about the I-95. I followed up with a letter, and the draft letter is in your pack. And we'd like to follow this up again in the fall at the CTB, just to make sure that they realize that we're quite serious about this. This board, this policy committee did vote to ask for those things and have consultation with the Secretary for Transportation before my time. So what I'm doing is just re-emphasizing what you've already decided in the past. Next slide. Freight. You remember last time we spoke about these critical freight corridors that the state had decided to delineate, and no new corridors were delineated in our area. There's a reason for that. One of the rules that they have to follow is the order of magnitude comparison by tonnage. And we're keen to have things like Route 1 and Route 17 chosen as critical freight corridors. But because of that tonnage requirement, Route 1 and Route 17 fall to the very bottom of the pile, and they can only allocate a certain number of miles per state to be identified as critical freight corridors. So because of that, Route 1 and Route 17, as examples, among others, have not been identified as critical freight corridors. Next slide. However, we're aware from extensive research that freight traffic movements in the FAMPO and Fredericksburg region have some of the worst travel time and congestion metrics in the state, and in some cases, the delays of freight is the worst in the nation. So, federal law such as the FAST Act focuses primarily on highways, tonnage, and other metrics, but not specifically travel time metrics and delays. OIP has asked whether we have any objection to their listing of that list that I showed you last month of critical freight corridors. We don't propose objecting for the simple reason that OIP is implementing the rules correctly. So OIP is not making any mistakes. We've extensively dug into this. I spoke to Ivan Rucker, I've spoken to people in Richmond and looked through the thing. They're following the rules, so we don't feel that we should be objecting. However, my last point, I would suggest that the legislation itself needs a review because it doesn't look into travel time delays and it doesn't look at roadways other than interstate roadways specifically. And I think that's a limitation in the law, not in the implementation. So my advice is we don't object to what OIP is doing because they're following the rules, right? They're not breaking any rules. There's nothing we can see that they're doing wrong. But we should in future be looking at getting our federal delegates and state delegates to review this law. It has some weaknesses in it. Next slide. The East-West study, just a quick reminder of what we're doing. Phase 1, we're looking at multimodal transit, TDM, and related improvements, bike and pedestrian links to transit studies. Phase 2, we'll look at roadways, bike and pedestrian improvements to improve East-West mobility, and this will include detailed route alignment and right-of-way engineering for all modes. Next slide. We're starting on the 1st of July. That's when the grant for the first phase becomes available, assuming that we get the final approval by CTB of their 6-year improvement program. We're looking at the first stakeholder meeting around the 1st of August. And, we're going to look at current spread routes, omni-ride routes, VRE routes, land pool connections, plus new possibilities. Next slide. Phase 2 will start perhaps 6 months later, subject to funding, if you agree to the funding amount that's in the pack, because we will need funding or some other form of funding to do phase 2, because phase 2 is roadways, and we can't use DRPT money for roadways. It's illegal. We're going to use the same stakeholder group. Some issues are obvious, such as congestion on those key roadways. We're going to look at those, and we're going to look at recommendations followed by right-of-way engineering where applicable for all modes. Next slide. Both phases aim to produce recommendations which can be included in future smart scale applications and updates to the LRTP. The recommendations should lead to funding applications and recommendations to state partners and local jurisdictions. Just a reminder, DRPT and 5307 funds can only be used for transit. We can't use that money for roadways. The proposed TIP funding, which is in your pack, would cover roadways, bike portion, and the right-of-way engineering. Next slide. The census stuff, the presentations in the pack, there's some concerning implications which we'll share with you. We've done more work since our last meeting on this. There's a possibility of a severing of the urban area connection between Stafford and the Washington, D.C. UZA, depending on what implementation the Census Bureau does, right? Then you'll see that in the presentation. This, together with potential increased funding possibilities, should give FAMPO reason enough to begin at least to think about the possibility of a FAMPO TMA instead of being attached to the DC TMA. Now, that's something for you to think about. I'm not telling you what you should be doing. If there is a danger of us losing the connection to the TMA with DC, we will lose funding. Next slide. And see that in the later presentation. The next slide I'm going to go through very quickly, just to update you on what's happening across the border next door at Quantico, the proposal to extend the metro line from DC all the way to Quantico or somewhere around there. These are the possibilities they're looking at. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, just one back, please. Go back to the yellow line there. So the yellow line down to Tomac Mills, that's one possibility, extending the metro line. 2, next one. The blue line possibility, next one. And that's BRT alternative, bus rapid transit instead of the metro line. Next one. That is using the existing BRE, but just putting much more in terms of the number of trains and headways and all that kind of stuff to increase the amount of traffic on the BRE line. That's another alternative they're looking at. Next one. And this is using express buses instead of all of those things as another alternative. Next one. That's the guy that has been giving us just information on what is happening there. And if you want to comment or want further information, it's in your pack. So any one of our jurisdictions can email and ask for further information. Next slide. Way forward, the CMAC RSTD budgets were reduced initially, remember, by 2.7 million. And then recent upgrades increased the amounts again. So we got HIP funding, we got other funding, which you'll see in the pack. The RFP, we had it delayed. VDOT came to us and said, they need to send our RFP to Richmond for the DBE, disadvantaged and so on enterprises, to examine our RFP. They came back and said, we're going to have a 12% DBE quota. Forgive my language, I'm not familiar as much with the legislation language as what you are. And so that led to a delay. So we're now meeting with them next week to just discuss how exactly we should couch that in our RFP. And we're going to release the RFP on the 1st of June. So it's a month later than we planned, but I just wanted you to know why the delay. It's because we were requested to put the RFP through that DBE process. We've prepared a broad mobility and accessibility survey, which is going to go with the LRTP and the East West Mobility Study to ask the public again, where does the transportation system not work for you? What routes don't work for you? Where are destinations you want to get to that you can't get to, etc. We're searching for funding for a future freight study. I'm not doing that with any enthusiasm right now because we've got a lot going on, but we are looking. We continue to work with Swasveni and Fredericksburg on salvaging as much of the VCR right away as we can. And future proposals on transit-oriented development zones are something that I think we should think about in the future. Thank you very much. Is that the last slide?
Yeah, that's the last one, Ian.
Great. So, Madam Chair, slides are done. I'll take any questions. I try to do them very quickly.
Go ahead, Christian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I agree. First of all, I love your Batman cufflinks.
I saw those also.
They're pretty awesome. Can you guys hear me on the conference call? I know Tim's talking pretty loud, but I was just wondering if I'm readable or not. I'll get closer to the mic if I'm not.
Coming through loud and clear.
Loud and clear? Okay, great. So I have quite a few years, although not the last, of commuting up and down I-95. And I couldn't agree with you more, saying that when I-95 stops, everything stops. It just backs up 610 in Stafford. It backs up Route 3. It backs up Route 1. Everything comes to a stop. And we've had chemical spills right before the bridge, right? I don't necessarily agree with more commuters or like buses and that, only because somebody's gonna be sitting on a bus in that situation on 985 in the parking lot, right? And maybe you can improve the roads, Route 1, Route 3, 610, but it would take a heck of a lot of money to do. And just from that 20 years of experience in commuting, what we're short on here without a study is river crossings, right? We're short on river crossings. That's the block. It's been that way since the Civil War. It's still the case today. You know, we've tried, Spotsylvania County has tried this back in 2013 and I've all but given up on it, right? So I'll just throw that out there with the outer connector, different outer connectors, like east, west, whatever we have. Without a study, we need river crossings or we're gonna just go into that same parking lot. So
It's certainly something we can look at in our future studies.
all right, well, thank you. That's all I've got.
Yeah, Mr. Kelly.
I'll follow up on that. And one other thing. Earlier this week, geez, time flies. I sat in on a tabletop regional exercise on a scenario with a tractor trailer slamming into the bridge on 95, number of fatalities. And first off, I want to thank everybody's staff did a great job on what their roles would be and how they would fill in and how they would each respond to this. And did a great job identifying all the problems that are out there that we have to face in a situation like that. But we're really, really, really short on solutions, because of capabilities and everything else like that to deal with something of that massive scale. So frankly, anything we could do that could actually pre-plan a little bit with regards to routes, whatever the option is, it's something we really need to look at, which results in a question I had for Marcy, not a year or so ago, when we started looking at this work being done on 95, the state recognized that they had to look for alternatives to get around 95 when things happen. And specifically with regards to construction, they were looking at making improvements on 301 corridor and being able to use that as a diversion of traffic, basically up to 60 points out forward. I just want to know what has been done moving that initiative forward.
So we had completed the 301 corridor study. King George and Caroline counties had both requested different projects through the Smart Scale. Some of them did get approved in the last round of Smart Scale, and you're putting me on the spot, and I don't remember which ones they were off the top of my head. But there are at least 3 or 4 projects, I believe, along the 301 corridor that were approved in the last round of Smart Scale. So there's still a few years away from construction.
Hey, it's Annie here. I can tell you which ones they were if y'all want some help.
Sure.
I'm sure we can get that information for
I
you.
just wanted to see how far we're on. That's pretty important. That's why I keep saying it's a very important corridor for us if something happens. I'll jump up to the other one. Have been involved in the discussions at both VRE and PRTC on the mobility study from Springfield to Quantico. And I do want to say I've asked on a number of occasions, when most of the people that are actually going to be using all that are coming from the FAMPO jurisdictions, why aren't we a little bit more involved in that conversation than we are? But I think
because it is strictly a political game. I've been dealing with this for 15 years. Every single candidate person who runs in Prince William County and parts of Fairfax, as part of their platform for 15 or 20 years, says Metro to Potomac Mills or Metro to Prince William. Never Metro further south. Never. We're not included in any of that. Ever.
well, the reason I brought it up, and I don't know if the policy board wants to go down this road, but to your point, it is an opportunity for us, while we're not directly involved in it, that we can take a policy decision and say, these are the options we would prefer to look at. Because frankly, if we were to look at a Metro option, the amount of money that's going to cost and how much money it's going to divert could be potentially an issue with us. And maybe look at VRE expansion, that makes sense for us too, because we're running most of the trains out of our areas and everything else. So I don't know if at some point staff or the policy committee wants to make a specific recommendation, as we are basically a big stakeholder in that planning, because we are people from those cases moving, that we might want to say something official as FAMPO on our recommendations on that study.
Is that
Just to get it on.
How many times I've been in this discussion, and it's almost laughable. And you know, now all the representatives up and down any of those proposed lines are now delegates, Democratic delegates in the House and Senate. And this is they just say it. I think we've already done a study on this back 12, 14 years ago. And it was I think just off the cuff, it was like a $10 billion project back 10 years ago. So it's probably a $20 billion project now. So it's strict, but the worst part of it is you put it out here and they discussed it, and they talked about a study, and a whole bunch of people think, oh man, this guy's done a great job. And there isn't the money to go anywhere. And if you notice, the corridor they want to go down is strictly housing. They're communities, there's very little industry or commercial traffic along there. If you look at the route that went out toward Leesburg, and you look at all the international and national headquarters and whatever all along that route, you'll see a major difference in how they'll look at the study. The study will take what? How long did they say the study would be? Year or two?
I think it takes a year. They're currently busy with it, and I think it wraps up. I can't remember the exact completion date. I don't have a computer.
I guarantee it's aligned with one of the elections that are coming up.
That's a year.
Yeah.
It would just be.
I forgive me, I'm just.
And I share your frustration, because at sitting in these meetings, it is interesting that we keep hearing about MBTC and we hear about PRTC, but nobody at the table up there really, we have to raise our hands and go, excuse me, there's some sort of jurisdictions which frankly, over the next 10 or 15 years, when it comes to population growth and everything else like that, are going to become much bigger players in this whole corridor than even our Northern Virginia friends. So I'd like this, if we could take the opportunity to say FAMPO, which is a big chunk, has a position on this, and this is what our position is. Understanding its potential speed bump. But if we don't say anything, then we just continue down this road and they do exactly what you're saying. At least they have to take a moment to think about it. It's worth the
Well, I
effort.
mean, if we were our own,
TMA.
TMA, I mean, we would have more clout, at least in what we were saying. I mean, they would have to pay attention. So any idea when we might, that's going to fall out?
We're going to show you the census stuff right now, and it does not look like it's going to get better for us just looking at the proposals they have for changing the way they calculate urban areas. The back door or the B route is to approach the governor and say, we request, FAMPO request the governor to declare TMA here, because if the governor declares that there's no numerical requirement, it doesn't matter how many people there are, it's at the discretion of the policy committee and the governor. And if the governor and the policy committee agree, a letter goes to the Secretary for Transportation, and the rule says that he must then declare it a transportation management area. So it's up to the local MPO and the governor to agree or not agree on the issue, and then to send letters to the Secretary for Transportation. Those are the two ways. You either reach 200,000 people in your urban area, or you make a decision to have a TMA, and then you approach the governor to give you a letter of support that goes to the Secretary for Transportation. He pretty much doesn't have much say, the Secretary for Transportation federally. It pretty much doesn't have a lot of say. He has to implement, if there's 200,000 people, he has to. Or if the governor and the MPO request it, he basically has to as well. There's very little leeway on the Secretary. Those other two approaches. But we can find out more information if the policy committee
Well, I mean,
requests us.
the relationship between the TMA and Josh Cole's big plan for what is it? Transportation Authority. How are all those things connected? I don't know, and I've been involved in
Well, I think
this
the
for a long
transportation
time.
authority discussion, yeah, well,
My point is that we shouldn't deal with any requests or whatever in a vacuum without seeing how all of that connects, if it connects. Maybe, but I mean, look at the conglomeration of crap you have up in the north. It's hard to tell who's in charge of what, who plans for what, who's in charge. I'm always confused up there with that. So if we're going to do something like you're talking about, I think we need to methodically look at how potential pieces are connected and whether we want to do them.
well, I would say after the presentation, we might want to just at least direct staff to bring that information back for us to look at.
I agree.
Like a report?
Yeah.
We could do a report.
Well, I think everybody can see what it is, and then we can.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll set that to the agenda next.
I'll do that. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
That's it for me, by the way.
Thank you, Mr.
I
Item number
determined to come here
two.
not saying anything. I always get my foot in my mouth.
It's gotta be somewhere, that's correct.
All right, what are we on now?
We're
Next
on,
item on, are you finished, Mr.?
I'm finished.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your report. Item number 9 in our action discussion items. First item up is the variable speed limit presentation. Ms. Marcy Farmer, take it away.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. In the last two FAMPO meetings, I had mentioned that I-95 would be getting variable speed limits between milepost 115 and milepost 130 northbound on 95. At the April CTB meeting, there was an in-depth presentation, and tonight I'm going to go through an abbreviated version of that presentation to bring you up to date. The full version is on our website as well as at the CTB meeting if you wanted to watch that at some point in the future. Next slide, please. So many of you remember that VDOT had performed a corridor study of all of I-95 in Virginia, from Washington or Maryland all the way down to North Carolina back in 2019. And we'd had numerous public meetings during that time frame. Recommendations from that study were presented to the CTB in January of 2020. And excuse me, at that time, the CTB did approve the operational improvements that were recommended in the study, but they did hold off on the capital improvements in order for VDOT to conduct a similar study on I-64. And that study is almost finalized. So this project was one of the recommended operational improvements from the I-95 corridor plan. And some reasons that this project was chosen were the recurring and the non-recurring congestion. So anyone who lives around here knows that that area backs up frequently, especially on the weekends. And this section also has a higher crash rate, and those crashes do cause significant delays. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the annual person hours of delay. And you can see that the hours start rising just on northbound, just as you start to approach exit 118, which is Thornburg, and that's the green line is northbound. The red line is southbound. So the hours of delay, they steadily increase as you approach the Rappahannock River. And on the next slide, we talk a little bit about the collision types. So looking at the collision types in this area, you can see that the majority are rear end collisions. And this is not shocking. And this is mostly due to the speed differential that exists out there and of course, bad driving habits. So speeds ahead slow down quickly, and the people that are following too close or not paying attention tend to rear end the vehicle in front of them. There's also a high rate, 19% of fixed object off the road accidents. And this falls in line with the same type of thing, that speeds are slowing very quickly, and then the people try to avoid hitting the vehicle in front of them, thus swerving off the road and hitting guardrail, trees, poles, signs, a variety of things. Next slide. So this slide shows the number of days that the speed is reduced along the corridor. And it appears that it went from January of 2019 through August of 2020. And as you can surmise, green is good, red is bad. In the boxed out area on the right-hand side, you can see that for 110 days in that time period, the speed was 5 to 15 miles an hour below the speed limit. And for 68 days of that time period, it was 35 to 45 miles below the speed limit. And the speed limit in that section, the majority of the speed limit is 70. It does drop down to 65 around exit 126. So the theory behind variable speed limits is to slow the traffic earlier to avoid the big bottleneck. Think of it as pouring rice through a funnel. If you just dump all the rice in the funnel, it takes a long time for that rice to get through. But if you slowly pour the rice into the funnel, it passes through easily. Next slide. So what is it going to look like? What are you going to see out there? You will see there'll be about 6 additional cameras, surveillance cameras, which is kind of in the middle of the screen, that will monitor the traffic. And then the actual variable speed limit signs, you can kind of see there's one on each side, and that'll be a white and black static sign. And the only thing that'll change on it, the variable part, will be the number. So these are similar to the signs near the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, if you ever travel down that way. And then of course there's a flashing light, a flashing beacon on top of those signs. And that light will flash when the speed is less than either 65 or 70, whichever is the normal posted speed in that area. So there'll be about 24 of those signs, one on the right, one on the left, in about 12 different locations. And then there'll also be a radar detector device on a pole, which is also over on the right-hand side. And that's going to be collecting the data that's needed to determine what the speed is. So on the next slide, we'll kind of show you a little bit about that. So if you follow along, number 1 in the top middle, that radar device, it collects the speed and the volume and some occupancy data, and it sends it over to the control algorithm, and then a whole bunch of math and stuff I don't understand is put together, and it derives what the posted speed limit should be. And then it sends that speed limit out to the road, and it puts this posted speed limit up. And it can do this, so it's collecting this data every 30 seconds, but we will not change the speed limit less than every 60 seconds. And it won't be that often, it'll be a lot longer than that, I'm sure. So on the next slide, it talks about the project timeline. And, you know, we're well into this project. The algorithm is in development. We're in design right now for where the signs are going to go and the utilities. You know, we need power and we need internet and things like that to these locations. So all of that is in design, and then it will quickly go into construction in the near future, and then it'll become operational in the fall of 2021. Now, we have developed a public engagement plan, and on the next slide, it talks a little bit about that. And we're still developing what we're going to do. So the messaging that we're going to go out to the public with is really twofold. It's about increasing awareness of what variable speed limits are. And it's also going to talk about the safety. It's going to be heavy into the safety on why we need to do this. So we've got 3 waves kind of timing. We did the CTV presentation last month, and that was the first wave. When we're ready to turn on the system, there'll be a whole launch type of communications plan. And then we feel that each season or each summer season, we're going to need to do some sort of education because every year we get people coming through the 95 corridor that only come through here once or twice a year when they're on their way to vacation. So we're looking at, you know, reaching out to other states as well as other areas, and like AAA magazine as an example, things like that, to explain what this is. And so we'll try to do some sort of outreach each year. We have a lot of detailed information on our website at that web address. There's a frequently asked questions, there's a video, there's the presentation that was given at the CTB meeting last month. And then some of the strategies we're using, we are partnering with state police on this, of course, because, you know, they are the enforcement arm of the Commonwealth, and they will jointly launch this project with us. And we will launch like social media, we'll, you know, buy some media, we'll use whatever we have, and then we'll probably have some sort of event at the I-95 rest areas, along with have a lot of information posted there as driver stop. We hope that that'll hit a lot of maybe the out-of-state folks who need to rest before they start to go up, because they may know that there's a lot of traffic on 95 as you head north. Some other things we're doing, we will be briefing the local governments and the local law enforcement before we activate this. And we want to make sure that we're communicating the change early with the private mapping partners. So we want to talk to Waze and Google and things like that to make sure that they understand what's going on, and you know, what they do with that information, that is up to them, but we want to make sure that they understand the information that they may be getting. So the next slide is just the YouTube video link to watch the video that explains all this much better than I did. And it even has a little video showing the rice going through the funnel, which is pretty cute. And then the next slide just is for questions. So if anybody has any questions, I will do my best to answer them.
Mr. Kelly,
It sounds like this is already up and running going forward, but I just said, is there anything out there on best practices where this has been done before that we can look at and see how it's actually worked? Or is this something that we are kind of taking on our own?
So VDOT has a couple different ones that they are not based on speed though. So on I-77, we have variable speed limits for fog. So that's really weather related. As the fog starts to come, there's a huge bridge on I-77. I'm not sure exactly what it goes over. I've only been on it a few times, but a lot of fog comes in there, so they reduce the speed limit, and that's more for a safety thing. We do have variable speed limits also at the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, and that is really, you know, when you're slowing the people down because you're clearing something from the tunnel. It's similar to that. We did reach out. There are other states in the country that use this. Colorado is big with it. I know we've talked to them a lot. I forget what other states are using it right now, but we have spoken with those states. We have gotten a lot of advice on both how the system works, what works well, what doesn't work well, as well as their communication plan on how do they alert people of what's going on. One thing I did leave out is that at every exit, an entrance ramp really, which is really only Thornburg, Massaponax, and I think it wraps up right before 1:30 gets on. There will be message boards that are posted that will say if the variable speed limit is in effect or not. So it's not like you're going to get on and you're going to be like, oh my God, what's the speed limit? And plus with, you know, 24 signs, you should see it in the corridor. But we will have notification on the ramps to let people know that the variable speed limits are in effect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ross.
Yeah, so I had the same question as Matt. So there's no white papers or anything from another state? I mean, I question the effectiveness of this. I'm from a small town in Iowa, used to obeying the speed limit there. And I remember in 1988, when I went to the basic school at Quantico, how going with the flow of traffic, I looked down at my second lieutenant bill and I'm going 80 miles per hour because I'm going with the flow of traffic, right? And it seems like traffic here it goes with the flow of the traffic. So I hope we're not spending a whole bunch of money on something. And you're right, enforcement is key. But how much enforcement do we see on I-95 today when people are doing 80 on I-95 today or 70 or whatever? You don't see it. If everybody's going that speed, they're not pulling everybody over. So have you looked at that? Have you looked at, here's what it's going to take. Here's how many cars are going to have to get pulled over to have them actually obey these speed limits, or do you think they're just going to be ignored? Because I personally think they'll be ignored and the traffic flow will be what the traffic flow is.
So I don't know if there's a white paper here in Virginia, but yes, there's lots of research that's been done on this. Like I said, in other states, as well as the research that we had done, that does show that this does work. And this is not a pilot, but this is the only place we're putting it because we feel that this.
Where has it worked? Where has it worked where we can see something that's before it was put in effect and after, and what the effect was?
Colorado, like I said, Colorado, like I said, has used it for I want to say over 10 years now.
Again, I'm sorry. Let me make it clear. I'm not talking about using it. I'm talking about the effectiveness of it.
Well, I don't know if they have an effectiveness like document, but I don't think they would use it if it wasn't.
Somebody knows if it works or not. It's just some model.
Well, Colorado wouldn't keep it for 10 years.
I would hope VDOT would have something like, yeah, you know what, this is actually effective. Not that it's just been in use. Do you have something like that from anywhere?
I'm sure that our traffic engineering section does. But again, Colorado wouldn't use it for 10 years if it wasn't effective.
Well, that's not true. We have speed limits that go down to 55 when you get into DC right now, and whether they're effective or not, I would say is they're not. When you drive into DC from here, the speed limit cuts from 65 to 55, cars are still going 70. So I would say that's not effective. And we've been doing that for 30 years or longer. So I would disagree with you there. Just because you've been doing it doesn't mean it's effective. That's a good question.
Jen, could we ask VDOT to send us that information so that I will make it, whatever they send, I'll make available to the entire committee.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chair recognizes.
And just as a follow-up, what is the cost of implementation of this program?
I believe this certain area is about $11 million, with most of the cost really being in the utilities that need to be run to operate these signs.
So not just to ask a follow-up question for Dave there. So we made a decision to move forward on spending $11 million. There had been some level of analysis or something that got us to the decision point to spend money. And I think ultimately that's what Dave is asking for. What information did you use to make the decision to spend $11 million?
And again, I will need to talk to our traffic engineering group to see what information they have. They're the ones leading this project.
Right, I think we understand, but if you could get that to us, that level of data that helps to make that decision, that would be helpful for us.
Okay, will do.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Parker. Can you provide that prior to our next meeting, or so we can have it at the next meeting?
I will try.
Thank you very much, ma'am. All right. Any other questions about the variable speed limits today? All right, thank you. Next item on the agenda is the U.S. Census Bureau update, and this is an action item.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yes, the letter is the action item. we showed you a presentation last time, and the staff came to me and said they would like to at least have the opportunity to map and model what we think the implications are going to be. So we're going to do a presentation now and show you what we've been able to find with the research that we've done in the last month. So if I can have the next slide, please. This you've seen before, the red and green dots show you what's good or bad. Next slide. This one we changed because of our mapping. Last time I said this wasn't going to impact us. I didn't think that much. But when you do the mapping and the modeling, we are changing that from a green dot to a red dot because we think it is going to have an impact, and we'll show you why in a minute. So it's the same slide. I've just changed the green dot to a red dot because it's a warning. I think this is not going to be good for FAMPO. Next one. You've seen this as well. The jumps and the hops, it's bad for us. I've told you that before. Next one. And they're not going to include the low density territory within an high density area. I've shown you that before. That's a red dot. Next slide. This one I've also shown you before. It's the example that they showed of DC, where they're going to shift some of the Baltimore urban area to be part of the DC urban area. It's not good. We wonder about how the impact is going to be on the southern end of DC, which affects FAMPO, the DC urbanized area. Next slide. So now staff did some additional work, a whole month of work. We completed a project to estimate what the 2020 urban area population would be with these projected Census Bureau changes. The next points explain that it's difficult to do because the census hasn't released their data. They're asking us to give them our opinion before they've given us the data of the 2020 census, which makes this difficult. We've estimated the urban area at 2019 housing block levels because that's the only one we've got. It's the latest thing that we can do. The 2019 housing data units are not available at the block level. Data on 2010 housing units we increased it to 2019 using the block group growth rates. These are all technical things. This is how we model it. This is how we came to the model. And we used 2010 block geographies because the 2020 ones are hidden from us. The Census Bureau hasn't released them yet. So that's just an explanation of we had to do some estimation. Okay, and that's the proviso. Everything we're going to show you from now on is an estimation. So it's not going to be 100% accurate because we can't get the data because they won't release it until later in the year. So we use those 2019 housing units data and further steps outlined by the US Census Bureau. Matthew, could you take over from here and walk us through the rest of the slides?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Ian, and good evening, everyone. So this slide shown in the map on the right are the outcomes of our analysis. And again, I'll reiterate, this is an estimate and it will not look exactly like this when the census releases whatever they release next year. So shown in blue are what the proposed criteria could look like for the 2020 urban area, and shown in pink are the existing 2010 urban area. You will see the Fredericksburg urban area in the bottom center of the map with the city of Fredericksburg and surrounding areas in Spotsylvania and Stafford counties. And you'll see North Stafford urban area, part of the larger Washington, D.C., Virginia, Maryland urban area in the top center of the map. Based on our analysis, the proposed changes to the urban area criteria likely mean less total area outlined as urban and less population outlined as urban as well. So a decrease in both of those factors.
Just hold there for 1 second. So this is the key point, people. The pink was what you had, and the blue is what you're going to be left with. That's the point. If we are right, and it's an estimate. Carry on.
Yep. Next slide. So as well as that analysis, alongside that, shown in the map on the right are the outcomes for looking at the North Stafford urban area. So one of the things that Ian mentioned in his earlier presentation. So really showing the connection between the North Stafford urban area and Prince William County, which is the Washington, D.C., Virginia, Maryland urban area. So currently, the North Stafford urban area is connected to that. However, it very well could change for the 2020 census. However, based on our analysis, I don't think it will change. It's still likely to connect and be within the new 1.5 mile jump criteria. It would be 1.38 miles. However, as Ian mentioned and emphasized earlier, this is all an estimate. And one of the items we don't have are the block geographies. So we don't have the 2020 geographies that will be drawn based on kind of new development patterns and whatnot for this area. So if those geographies were to change by 0.12 of a mile, we could see a change in what our analysis shows, basically the connection or the severing of this connection. Again,
that's crucial. Sorry, Matthew.
Go ahead.
That's the crucial point for Stafford and for FAMPO. You see that gap between the two areas of pink? The north pink area is DC's urbanized area. The south pink one is Stafford. They're no longer joined. But because the gap is less than 1.5 miles, we think it's okay. Because 1.5 miles, they still bridge. But it's an estimate. So if we're slightly off on what they're going to give us when they give us the data, that could snap. Now, our modeling suggests it's going to remain because that gap is smaller than 1.5 miles. So we think it's going to remain, and the TMA in FAMPO region will stay connected to the DC urbanized area. We think the urbanized area of Stafford and DC will remain connected because their new criteria say that if the gap is less than 1.5 miles, they will still join them. But it's an estimate.
Matt, quick question, please. Does the census data ignore the population that lives on Bates in that scenario?
The population is counted per block. So it doesn't ignore any population, but each block has to be above the threshold to be included in the pink. So if the block in between has got less than that many units per square mile or per whatever it is, Matthew can best explain it.
Yeah, just to reemphasize again, we're looking at one of the proposed changes was using housing units. So housing unit density per block. So I believe it was 385 housing unit density per square mile or so per block. So what you're looking at here are shown in pink are the blocks that are above that density. However, those kind of what I've drawn here, those two that Adam actually just circled are just above the threshold and very well based on how we summarized our analysis, could not be urban. So that's why I draw the blue line just slightly lower. So that blue line is representing the distance between the two.
Quick question.
Yeah.
So you said housing units. So at no point are commercial properties, how are they determining, I guess, I mean, I'm thinking even like in downtown DC, you're going to have blocks that are just office buildings. So is it right, downtown DC not an urban area anymore?
So there's a couple of processes that are used to delineate urban areas. The Census Bureau released for their proposed criteria, kind of how they go about determining the urban area. And that is Federal Registrar U.S. Census Urban Area Proposed Criteria Changes. And it basically delineates the first step being the housing unit density. And then the second or third or fourth step is looking at impervious surface criteria. So using a data set from remote sensing satellite analysis to determine the land area that is 20% or 30% impervious per block. And those blocks that have a high enough impervious ratio are determined to be urban and included. So hopefully that helps to answer your question. So any area that is impervious, roadways or a grayer color buildings will still be considered urban if that block has a high enough density of that. So downtown DC, of course, does. There are places in our region that have that criteria. So you'll see if we had shown a map of just housing unit density, and then we overlaid that with impervious surface criteria, you'll see where we added the impervious surfaces to our analysis.
Okay, so then just to drive it home, like Central Park would count because of the impervious surface.
Exactly, yeah. For instance, 4 Mile Fork area in Spotsylvania County, Route 1 and Route 208, there is a lot of more industrial-based areas there and businesses and less housing in some of those places. So those in the original analysis were not considered as housing unit density, but when we added the impervious surface criteria, those were considered as urban, so they were added. So you'll see in the map here, shown in blue, that area down in Spotsylvania County is urban.
Okay, thank you.
Move on.
All right, and the last slide here. So lastly, we have data on what, based on our analysis, the proposed criteria could mean. So shown are two tables. The first table is representing the estimated urban area in square miles. Shown is the 2010 values for the Fredericksburg and North Stafford urban areas, as well as the total between the two. This representing the total urban area in the FAMPO region. And shown is the potential 2020 urban area for the Fredericksburg and North Stafford. If the total, if the proposed criteria were to be enacted based on our analysis, we would see a 30 to 40% decrease in total urban area. And then the second table is representing what these numbers could mean in terms of total population in 2019, the most recent data year available. So the 2019 population based on the 2010 urban areas is that first line there. And then the second line is showing the potential 2020 urban area based on the proposed criteria. And then you can basically see that represented in green, that green box there under Fredericksburg and the 2010 UZA is data from the 2019 Census American Community Survey one-year survey, just showing their estimated population for the Fredericksburg urban area. While shown in yellow there are the population estimates that were adjusted at the block group level because 2019 data at the block level is not available yet, and of course 2020 census data is not released yet. So the yellow boxes there are estimates of what we think the population could be based on block groups and slightly adjusted. And the green there is the more, still an estimate, but more exact number of what the actual Fredericksburg population is. So that 240,000 is around what, based on the current criteria, is the population in our urban area. Then that 180,000 is what the proposed criteria could mean. So we could be looking at a 20 to 30% reduction in our total urban area population. And again, I'll note that these numbers are estimates and they were adjusted to account for some of the summarization in data. So that's why you see some of the clean numbers there for 180,000 and so on. And now I'll pass it back off to Ian. Thank you.
Thank you. The last concept I just need to explain is this. You can see by those numbers that the urban areas of the FAMPO region drop by 20 to 30% in number of population. So if everybody in the United States, after the implementation of these new criteria, also drops by 25%, or the same percentage as we do, it shouldn't really affect our funding unless the gap with Stafford to the DC TMA breaks. However, if some areas in the United States have a much smaller drop in their official population calculation than we do, they will benefit when the funding calculations get done. If they only drop by 2% and we drop by 25 to 30, we're going to lose out to places like Wilmington where the projected drop is only 2%. So it is important, this, and that's why we've raised it, and that's why the staff have tried. But what we're saying with these numbers is this is just an estimate that the staff has created based on the criteria released, and we've had to estimate the 2020 numbers and the 2020 block groups because the Census Bureau has not released them. So they're asking for comment before giving you the data to make an analysis, and that's the problem with this process. So the outcome that we're requesting is this letter, which is in your pack, which we're asking the chairperson to sign and say, we want to be one of those objectives. Here is our letter. And if you're agreeable to the letter, it's been in your pack for the last week, so I'm sure you've seen it. We would like to sign that letter to say to the Census Bureau, we think that this is not good for our area, and we would like them not to implement those criteria.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Any discussion?
Do you need a motion?
Yes. Do I need a motion? Thank you.
To approve the letter.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you,
Second.
Mr. Leach, and thank you, Mr. Kelly. Motion has been seconded. Is there any additional discussion?
Just a question.
Yes.
I mean, all this time, it looks like North Stafford could end up as an island out there all by itself. It's one of the fastest growing areas in the entire region, and it's going to be shafted.
That's exactly what some of our concerns are. The one concern is that we're going to lose funding if it shrinks and other areas don't shrink as much. And secondly, North Stafford could be cut off from DC. We think it's not going to happen because the gap we see is 1.3 miles and you've got up to 1.5 miles to jump a gap. But if anything in our figures is wrong, it could have a different outcome.
So, but you have to, in order to make that connection, you've got to count the housing on the base.
Yeah, we are counting the housing on the base, but it's got to be higher than 385 units per whatever it is.
It's not like
And
they're
he just
building
told you,
houses there.
and
They
it's,
built a ton of houses. Right there along Route 1, there's a big housing section there.
and each block group gets counted depending on the housing density in that block or in that block group. So it's not there are houses in the area. It's block by block by block by block. And if enough blocks in a row don't have it because the housing is further away, all that doesn't get counted towards the urban area designation. We're only talking about an urbanized area designation. No one's moving people.
Okay, we're sending this letter, I'm sorry, we're sending this letter to the Census Bureau.
Yes.
Should we also copy all of our legislators? Rob Whitman,
Good idea.
Kane, Warner, all those guys, to let them
Absolutely.
know where we are.
If you look at the bottom of the letter, it says CC state delegates, and we can do federal delegates as well, but we are actually intending to do that.
Well, I think the federal would have more impact on the census than any of our, we might ought
So we're having,
to consider bringing Rob in to talk to us.
Yes. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah.
But I mean, it's because they're not going to understand. This is what happened to us 10 years ago was they made changes and whatever, and you don't get a chance. They're already implemented by the time you recognize the impact on what there's going to be there. And I don't know, it looks pretty bad to me, and I don't understand why they think they're doing this. Do we have any explanation of why they're doing this?
so there's a full document, but I mean, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. The basic point is that two basic comments from the Census Bureau. The one is that they've got more sophisticated tools now, so they can do a more detailed analysis. They don't have to take big areas. They can now do it by a little area at a time. The second thing is that because everywhere is grown, if the criteria remain the same for 300 years, almost everywhere will be urban if you use the same criteria. So what they're arguing is eventually we have to up the quota to determine what's urban, because otherwise you'll have wall-to-wall urban from here to the Pacific Ocean. And secondly, they've now got these clever tools where they can cut out all of the lower density areas within your urban area to exclude them, to keep the urban areas smaller, the designation of urbanized area smaller. It's highly technical stuff.
What you're saying basically is they want to, in a sense, ignore the growth if they can.
If the growth is not high enough, they don't want to include it as sort of. I mean, I'm doing the rules and injustice the way I'm summarizing, but that's kind of the thing.
So there'll be areas that are in urban areas that'll get more funding than areas like us, where the traffic is growing at an astronomical rate. I mean, we have these massive increases and changes, and we're going to be ignored again.
Yes, another one of the criteria is whether 50% of your road traffic commutes to the urban area, which is DC, and 50% of our people do not currently commute to DC, and we don't like that metric. It's a dangerous metric because it can work against you. If we only have 41%.
But I don't remember the chart now, but North Stafford, I mean, intuitively, I believe better than 50% of the people work.
The street light data are not showing that, but it depends how you count, right? So every one of these things, it depends who's doing.
Well, I mean, not during COVID. I mean, obviously not during COVID, you're not going to see that because they've stayed home. But you go back to a normal situation. I mean, I could go up and down my street and tell you the number of people that are commuting up north. So I mean, whatever. I mean, this, we have no control.
I have a motion and a second, and then we had discussion that suggested that we add in our federal
I'll
counterparts.
take that as a friendly amendment.
Okay, thank you.
Do you accept? You seconded it, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Any additional changes?
No.
Okay, thank you. All approve, I'm
Any
sorry,
against?
I haven't even asked for
I'm
nays.
sorry, I beg your pardon.
Okay, all approve, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you, sir. All opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? Chair votes aye, motion passes with the amendment to add in the federal designations.
Madam Chair, can I just, going back to our original discussion, Mark, this is why we probably want, if you want to make the motion, I'll let you all do it. At least have Ian come back the next meeting and what the outlines of what applying to TMA would be. At least start that, collecting that information.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think Cindy asked for it to be on the agenda, correct?
So if that's clear, you have clear direction. Okay, so make sure we didn't need a motion to do that.
We'll ask for Federal Highways to help us with the information.
You know, you struggle to get ahead, and you keep.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Like the dog, you keep it pushed in.
Thank you, Mr. Dudenheffer, or Supervisor Dudenheffer. Next item on the agenda is the letter to the Secretary of Transportation concerning the 6-year improvement program.
Madam Chair, I'm not going to say much about this. You all know I sent you the letter personally, and I sent it under my signature, and now we sent it a slightly modified one to send under the chair's signature, and we had no objections. So I'm hoping that you will agree to having the chair change it. It's basically reflecting the comments the chair made anyway at the thing, and it's your policy, which you voted on a year ago anyway. So it's just a letter saying, please don't forget this. We want this as a priority in our area. The I-95.
I think we're good.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Graham.
Thank you. So, I don't believe I was on FAMPO when this item was initially discussed. I just want to say that I do have concerns over it because there, everywhere in America where they've expanded the interstate, it's essentially, it looks like equivalent to setting taxpayer dollars on fire. I hate to be so dramatic about it, but it's never improved congestion for more than a short period of time. And I feel like we have so many more options for congestion mitigation, and added lanes have just never done it. And so I just like to understand a little bit more about what went into this, because it doesn't seem like it fits the research and the best practices that we've seen from cities across America.
I made a motion to approve. Does anybody want to second it?
Second.
All right, now we can either discuss it.
Right. So I have a motion to approve from Supervisor Panuch, as well as a second from Supervisor McLaughlin. Any additional discussion?
You want to, I can give a quick,
Supervisor, I'm sorry, Mr.
you
Kelly.
want to give the answer, or do you want? The quick and dirty on it is, you've got a situation where you're potentially going down from 6 lanes, even with CE roads, down to 3 lanes. And the problem is, we've modeled it a number of times, and we've had this conversation with VDOT, and I think, I'm not going to try to put words in Marcy's mouth, but even to your point, they agree that you start having significant backup issues still when you're taking 6 to 3. And all we're really asking for is an extension of one of the lanes north and south, just to give it a little bit better merge into flow of traffic, which I don't think anybody would disagree would be a benefit to movement of traffic on the 95 corridor. I guess that's in a nutshell, unless anybody wants to add anything to that.
Ms. Parker, do you want to respond to that?
Well, that was a pretty good summary. We don't necessarily think that there's going to be a problem in the beginning. There's enough traffic that cuts off at Route 17 and Route 3 that the volume drops below Route 3. So the merging back in, and we lengthened how long it merges, we think will work fine for a while. It is curious to note that this did come up, of course, in the FAMPO I-95 corridor study that we did a couple years ago. And then it also came up during the I-95 corridor plan that VDOT had done in 2019. And it is one of the recommended improvements, capital improvements for I-95. They just have not decided to vote on those capital improvements yet. I do believe there'll be a presentation about that at maybe the June meeting. They're looking how to prioritize all the capital improvements that came out of the I-95 and I-64 studies, and then they'll add them into the 6-year plan. But this is one of the recommendations that did come out of the I-95 corridor study, is to put a 4th lane between 130 and 126.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in approve, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Okay.
There's a nay. Okay, thank you. Any abstentions? Motion passes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Next item on the agenda is item 9D, the RFP for on-call consultants update. Mr. Owens.
Madam Chair, I've told you this in my previous presentation anyway, so I'm not going to say it all over again. The RFP is, we have to add this DVE calculation. We're going to do that, and we hope to proceed with the RFP on the 1st of June, assuming that we can clarify that with VDOT. But we've already got their response. We just need to clarify how to put it in the document, and then we're ready to go. So it's just notifying you that there's been a month delay, but we're back on track.
Mr. Owens, is there any impact to us because of that delay?
No impact currently.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, next item is item 9E, the Smart Scale Round 5 update. Mr. Owens again.
Okay.
Ms. Gibson.
Thank you. Good evening. So I will be brief. This is the first of many conversations we will have about Smart Scale Round 5 over the next year or so. But we did want to briefly kick this off. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our high level approach and then turn it over to Ian to go through the timeline. But just to kind of fill you all in, we are planning to approach this as a joint GWRC and FAMPO effort. So ultimately, there will be a GWRC list of projects and a FAMPO list of projects. And obviously, there's crossover in those jurisdictions. So we want to make sure that this is really a coordinated effort, that we're streamlining everything as much as possible and limiting duplication. We've also got the FAMPO staff also serving as the transportation staff to the rural localities. So just ultimately, we will be having these conversations all together and having joint meetings on this so that we're not, duplicating our efforts or having multiple meetings about the same topics. So just wanted to kind of tee that up, and then I'll turn it over to Ian to talk about kind of the specific timeline and approach that they've outlined.
Thank you. So we will run the proposals through the TAC so that you're all happy. It's not going to be done at some mysterious hidden committee. There's a timeline. VDOT has asked us if we could start earlier this cycle than we normally do. The reason for that is last time there was a bottleneck at the end where they had to do technical analysis of each application before that could be formally submitted, and it put their limited staff under huge pressure. Could we please start this a little earlier? We think that's fine. It gives us more time to prepare and our jurisdictions time to prepare their applications. So we've agreed to start earlier. We notified the TAC at their meeting that we're going to start this earlier. It seemed to be well received by all of our jurisdictions. So in May, we've started to just notify everybody that we're starting earlier. In June, we'll ask them to start giving us their suggested projects, not with all the details, just like we have a project on this road we think should be put in, that's all. So we're going to start a little earlier so that there isn't a mad rush at the end, and there's the projected timeline, which VDOT is quite happy with. We've run it by them as well. So.
I don't believe there's any action. Thank you.
No action required.
Didn't we move it up last time? So this is moving it up from the moving it up that we did last time on 4.
I wasn't around last time, so I can't speak to the dates last time. I'm not sure if Alex or Paul are online and wish to make a comment, but we are agreeable at the moment to use this timeline because it just gives time to do all of the stuff needed. It may have been that this is a additional move up from the move up last time. I can't say, I wasn't around.
You remember that? I mean, we had the
pre-approval. Each time we've gone through this, there's been some changes to the timeline on it. I think this makes perfect sense. It gives us more time to get.
I'm not opposed to it. I'm just, it's, every year we're moving it up again. I mean, before long, we're going to
shift it a few times. Yeah.
We're going to be doing 4 and 5 together or something.
Any more discussion on item 9E? Okay, thank you, sir. We're moving on to community engagement and equity plan update. Ms. Fine.
Yes, thanks. So I'm going to give you an overview tonight of our draft community engagement and equity plan that is currently out for public comment. Staff has worked over the past couple months to develop this document, and we've cooperated with some focus group participants who are made up of community members as well as some of our social service partners and officials from our school and things like that to really help refine strategies in this plan. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this plan, it satisfies and exceeds the federal requirements to have a Title VI, which is non-discrimination, and a public participation plan. In the past, we've had those two things separate. It just makes more sense to combine them together. This is also a plan for staff to follow to ensure that all members of the community have an opportunity to meaningfully participate. And for committee members, this is a written policy documenting what FAMPO staff should be doing with regards to Title VI and public participation. And it also provides the public with resources on how they can participate and makes our procedures transparent. Next slide, please. What the plan contains, so just a quick overview of the different sections. You'll note in this plan there's an overview that kind of gives brief descriptions of the federal non-discrimination laws and procedures that FAMPO is required to follow. Those include Title VI, limited English proficiency, and environmental justice, just to name a few. The plan also conveys the actions that FAMPO takes to comply with those requirements. The plan also has a section on goals and strategies that staff will use to bring the public into the decision-making process. And we've also included a method for staff to develop, document, and evaluate our outreach efforts. And there's a very small section, as I had mentioned, a small guide for the public that explains the importance of their participation and a few different ways they can participate. Next slide. So how is this plan different? If you've been around FAMPO long enough, you'll know that we have currently a Title VI plan and then a separate public participation plan. So this is one master plan. They are combined. However, there are two distinct sections, but it made more sense to combine them because the material and subject matter really overlapped. We don't do Title VI work without community engagement and vice versa. Again, so there's updated details, outreach strategies in this plan. We've updated our community engagement and equity goals. We've included that new participation guide for the public. We've developed a process for evaluating the effectiveness of our outreach strategies. And we've also added in the plan a process to plan our outreach efforts. One thing that I will call your attention to, the last bullet point at the bottom, we've included a provision in the document that staff can make administrative changes, so these are just small changes, and update data without seeking formal approval. By formal approval, I mean going through a 30-day or 45-day comment period. The language in there does state that we will make sure that the policy committee is aware of the changes that we are proposing, but this will really help us just update documents when VDOT says, oh, we need to update this or that. We can just go ahead and put that in there, get a new signature without having to go through formal approval. Just quickly, this slide, the bold print requires your attention, so you still have time to review this document. You will not be asked to vote on it until your June 21st meeting. And prior to that, we're going to have BPAC, TAC, and CTAC endorse that, and they will provide their feedback to you before you vote. Next slide. These are some items that we are doing for our public comment period efforts. It's a 45-day public comment. We've got flyers at the library, live stream Q&A, social media ads, mass emails. You all should have got that mass email. If not, please check your junk folder and help us spread the word. Web page, of course, and of course, they'll be able to address the policy committee either tonight, they could have, or at the June committee meeting. Next slide. Oh, the census. Here comes the census again. So you will notice that in Appendix B, is missing maps and data. We've intentionally done that. We want to use the most recent data, so we're going to wait until late summer, early fall when the 2020 census data comes out, and we'll create updated maps and data sets to keep in that plan. But importantly, we will not implement this plan, even though you're going to approve it before we get the data. We won't implement it until we have those current maps and data sets filled out and included in the plan. I believe that is the last slide. Any questions?
Go ahead, Mr. Keller.
Not a question, Stacy. I just want to say that in the last few months or so, I have been bumping into you on different media sites and social pages, including Fredericksburg Strongtown and a lot of other things, and I've seen a lot on paper and around town, and you've really stepped up the game, and I just really want to pass on my appreciation for all the hard work you're doing on this, because as somebody who's been on this board for a long time, I've probably seen FAMPO and what we're up to in the paper and social media more than I've ever seen it before, so thank you very much.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Meyer. Any other discussion, comments, questions?
Just a quick one.
Yes,
When
Ms.
this is all said and done, what do we do with the data? How does it help us?
Oh, great question. So the purpose of having the census data in the public participation in Title VI plan is to help us conduct strategic outreach. So talking about environmental justice groups, we need to proactively reach out to low income and minority populations. Those are what are referred to as environmental justice groups. So we need to know where those populations are concentrated in our region in order to reach out to them. Oftentimes we will go to certain library locations because we know that that's a place where they might frequent. We can reach them easily there rather than expect them to come to our meetings and meet us here where we are. Does that make sense?
Yes, but so a follow-up to that. So, we do this planning every year. So you have historical data that shows the engagement from those groups and how we can compare our past performance to what you're going to see based on this new initiative?
You mean tracking our interactions based on like demographic?
Well, yes. Basically, that's what I
Yes.
think you just told me you're going to do. So my question is, are we going to be able to compare this to previous engagements to determine whether this is effective or not?
That is going to be the goal, and that's a big change in this plan. So VDOT in our recent Title VI audit, they do ask us for data on participation, which includes the demographic data, how many, low-income people, how many minority people are you reaching, things like that. That, to my knowledge, has not been tracked in the past. Since I've been here, I have started tracking that. We track that every single month, and I'm happy to share our data with you. But that's kind of one of the reasons for changes in this plan is to make sure that we're tracking it, going back and analyzing it so we can see who we're reaching and who we're not. One of the biggest challenges right now is virtual meetings. Obviously, we might have people in our meetings and we can see that we've had people join our meetings. We don't know who they are. We do have a survey on our website for them to take to self-identify who they are. Yet they're pulling it up right now. So that should be included in the packet as well. But virtual involvement is really a challenge. So once we get back to in-person outreach, we can do a much better job of determining exactly who we're reaching and who we're not.
Okay, so yeah, in the future though, you could share some of that data just so we, down cost effectiveness. Is this the right approach, and are we seeing, percent increase in the engagements and all that various things? So,
right.
Yeah, in the future, if you got the month-to-month data and however you want to share it in the future, just as an email to the board occasionally, that'd be great.
Yes, and that actually there is language in the plan that requires that as well. I think I lost your audio.
So the only other comment I was going to make is for certain funding applications, we have to indicate whether this particular roadway or transit system or whatever goes through a community that serves low-income communities or whatever else. So we need that data for funding applications. So that's the other reason.
I understand this mandate. Any other comments or questions? All right, thank you very much. Let's moving on to a very important question and discussion about the Highway Infrastructure Program funding for FY22. This is an action item, of course.
Yes, Madam Chair. So this is funding which you'll remember we lost $2.7 million in funding from CMAC and RSTP. So we received notification that additional amounts of funding were going to be made available to our region. One of those is this highway improvement program. And this particular set of funding, we do not have a prioritization methodology to deal with it because it's not a regular funding stream. This is something that happens every so often when the government federally decides that there's money available and they make it available for this. It can be used in the same way as STBG funding, but it's not going to come every year. It comes once every 5 or 7 years or whenever there's funding available. So it's an unusual bonus amount of money, and we don't have a FAMPO prioritization methodology as to how to allocate it. So that's the briefing. We have received those amounts of funding. I don't know whether you can see those lines, 542,000 in the one stream, 78,000 in the other, 19,000 odd dollars. So it's 600 and some odd dollars in total that we have available to allocate. The TAC made a recommendation, I think the recommendation came from Spotsylvania, that we use 125,000 of this funding to phase 2 of the East-West Mobility Study because we have no money we can spend on roadways. All the other grants that we've got for the East-West Mobility Study are for transit only, and we have to answer how we spent it. So there's no money for the roadway portion. And the recommendation was that we spend the 125,000 on the East-West Mobility Study roadway portion, and the remaining balance of $515,000, we put it in the line item regionally significant projects, which means we're not allocating it to anything. We're parking it for the TAC and policy committee to decide in the future how they wish to allocate it. So the rest of it is being parked. It's not being allocated to a roadway or a intersection or anything. It's being parked with 515,000. So that is a recommendation from the TAC. And in this particular case, it was unanimous.
Do you have any questions for Mr. Hollis?
What's the last one? How much is this study? Did you get 55,000? There's a certain amount for transit for
59,100 we got from the DRPT grant. It has a matching amount, but that's money that we already have. It's not new money. And then there was the 40,000 for the 5307, and that's for transit. This amount would be for the roadways. So if we want to do roadway engineering, like we want to build a new road, or we want to widen Route 3 or Route 208.
Is this all going to be one effort?
It's one effort in 2 phases. We're just separating out the transit because we can't spend transit money on other things.
But it'll be the same contract.
It's the same project. It's one big project.
That's going to be competed?
Yes. So once we've done the RFP and we've got 3 different contractors, so some of this is going to be done in-house by staff, and some of it will be, we can't do modeling, so we farm that out to a contractor, and engineering drawings we can't do in-house, so we farm that out to a contractor. But that will be a full process. We're not asking approval for a process right now, just for the allocation.
Any additional questions, Mr. McCall?
And to park the rest of the funding for
Mr.
future.
Kelly,
Madam Chair, I'll move the item G.
do you have a second?
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Any additional discussions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Thank you very much, Mr. Hollis.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Next item on our agenda is CMAC and STBG funding. Again, Mr. Hollis, item number 1 are our current allocations.
So if we can just explain in a slide deck exactly where we are. So you'll remember we had that reduction in allocations and we had to remove money from the system because $2.7 million reduction we had to account for. So we then had to make allocations, and then we were told that you can see the timeline. Staff has had a very difficult time with this because the goalpost moved in the last 3 weeks. You can see that. Can you see all the dates? That's how many times the goalpost moved, and we had to try and allocate funding. So the Shelton Shop Road improvement application was swapped with Route 1 from a spot of from Stafford submissions, because we allowed each jurisdiction to have 3 projects, right? GWRC allocated 5307 funding. You know about that. This means 2.2 million was freed up for reallocation by FAMPO. We not provided finalized numbers on the 5th of the month. Also on the 5th, we heard about the highway improvement funds, which you just decided on in the previous item. Then on the 7th, we were notified that this $35,000 in CMAQ funding, this is one of those which I mentioned it earlier in the meeting, members, has to be done today, that line item there. It's from a closed out project that needs to be programmed to something so that we don't lose it on the 1st of June. Then on the 10th, the TAC approved the draft allocations that are in your pack. Next slide. These are just the numbers which we've had for a while. No adjustments to that. CMAQ, STBG allocations, that's exactly what you've seen. Then we removed, here's how the allocation was done. We removed 2.2 million in CMAQ funding from the VRE stations. You know why that is? Because we got the 5307 funding. So we had to take the CMAQ funding off that. Then we funded Market Street. The policy committee made that decision last year. So we're merely implementing that decision, which you all decided on in September before I arrived. Then we follow the best practice to put a reserve. And the reason for the reserve is that VDOT keeps coming back and saying, oh, now you're going to fund another $20,000, another $50,000, another whatever else, because the cost of the project has gone up. So the practice is to put a 5% reserve each year to be able to account for these changes which get brought up, and then jurisdictions get stuck with that bill otherwise, because then they come and say, well, Stafford has to pay it or whatever. So that's why we do that.
We did.
You can see there what the amounts were. We then consolidated the allocation timeframes and kept the existing projects that were already in the system fully funded, despite the budget decreases. And then we allocated funds to advance an existing project of Onville Road to the next phase before adding new projects. That's what the existing policy says, the policy that we've received. Next slide. We then allocated funding to Transportation Demand Management GWI Connect off the top. Also, that's in the policy. The policy instructs us to do that, and it specifies how much and that we have to do that. We allocated the remaining funds based on project scores on the application priority. We asked each jurisdiction to tell us which is your number 1 project, which is your second most important project, which is your third most important project. After the TAC approval, VDOT came back with a further adjustment, the 35,000, which I just told you about, plus an 86,000 in previous SUGB funding needs, which need to be allocated. That we also have to do tonight. And the reason why we have to allocate that 86 and 35,000, it's small numbers compared to the rest, but that is because it's left over little bits from previous projects. And if we don't put it on a project, because it's old money, on the 1st of June, VDOT head office has a right to reallocate that to other jurisdictions because we didn't use the money. So that those two, it's urgent that we allocate those two. Next slide.
That's the last slide, Ian.
Okay, so that's the process that we followed to make those allocations. All right. The current allocations, what you already approved, you have that. You've seen that you approved that. There's nothing that the other you need to see. We then have the scoring, which we've done, and the action item, which there's been some debate about, Madam Chair, before you arrived, is this sheet. And what this sheet does is all of those steps that we've shown you, plus the 2 amounts that VDOT came back to us with and said, you need to program these 2 amounts, otherwise you'll lose them. And there was a further drop. Remember the 2.7 million drop? There was a further drop of 7,000. Adam, do you know what the exact number was? 7,000 and 7,000 and some odd change for FY22 that dropped still further. But then we got $600,000 back but not in FY22 in later years. So in other words, they took away this last email, took away another 7,000 and gave back in other financial years $600,000. That $600,000 has been parked in FY27. So the money that we've got at the last minute from VDOT in those later dates that I showed you on that slide, we've just parked. That's not been allocated. So if you look at FY27, you'll see there's a large amount of money sitting there. Adam, can you just move to there? If you look there, 401,000 and 471,000, that money is unallocated. Because VDOT gave it to us at the last minute, we have not allocated it. And we're not asking for approval to allocate it to anything. It's parked. It's not going to be allocated now because we felt it's inappropriate to suddenly do it at the last minute. And we had to have 2 TAC meetings this month just to deal with this. So we parked the additional 601,000 there, and the HIP money, we parked the 500,000 in regionally significant projects. So when you add that up, the 500, the 401, the 471, you can see there's a lot of money that we are not allocating yet because so the allocations we have made, of which there's been some debate, we followed the process. The money that came later, we just parked it because we didn't want to rush the process. But then we got the further notification that there are these 2 small amounts that we please need to do something about urgently because we can lose them. So that's the state of play right now. That's exactly where we are. And the TAC approved this slide without those last 2 little bits that I've just told you about, with the exception of Pennsylvania, who voted against. So the rest of the TAC voted in favor of this slide, with those 2 exceptions which they didn't know about. The 34 and 35 and 86. The 86 and the 35, the TAC was not able to allocate because the meeting ended before we got to be able to do that, and VDOT had only told us that literally at the last minute. So we couldn't do that. So we're asking you especially to approve what we would like to do with those 2 amounts of money. And there is only one project in this current list for which the 35 can go to, because it's got to have a very specific local match to save it. So the VCR bridge is the only project that VDOT found in our entire list that would qualify with all the rules. It's got to have a certain kind of local match, and that's the only project that could take that. And the 86K, Adam, can you just remind us where we allocated that? And again, it's basically a park. We put it on a project and took some money off that project and put it in, I think it's FY27, to just park it. So effectively, all we've done is put it somewhere so that they don't take it away from it. And that's what we've requested.
Mr. Kelly?
Can you, from the tax standpoint, give us specifically what, I mean, as I understand this, because we went through this whole process of trying to come up to something we can all agree to temporarily, and understand it was somewhat temporary, to keep moving forward and get the CMAQ allocations. So this is going by everything that we've agreed to up to this point. What specifically did the Spotsylvania representative have an issue with regards to voting against this?
So Spotsylvania sent us a list of concerns about items in that list about 15 minutes before the meeting started. And we found it quite difficult to deal with in the meeting, but we tried to answer the questions. And it's a very, very detailed list. It's very difficult to summarize because each item, there's a question mark, but shouldn't this item get a score 1 point higher? There's a question about the on-call road project, for example, whether that project is actually an existing project or is it a new project? And the Spotsylvania members wanted to debate whether it in fact was an existing project. And it has been in our CMAQ allocation, it already has funding. So we treated it as an existing project because it already has some funding. So there's a debate as to whether that funding, whether that project is in fact a new project. So it's that kind of very, very detailed questions. It's very detailed.
So it's basically a question of wanting to change the funding priorities on projects.
Well, yes, change the way the funding is allocated.
Okay.
But very
Chair
detailed.
recognizes Mr.
So a couple of questions. One, I mean, I don't know that question's right or wrong. I don't like because we ask a detailed question, that's not a bad thing. Not take the time to answer the detailed question. So I think that's part of the frustration with Spotsylvania and why they probably voted against it. And again, our staff is saying we want to defer or table this so we can actually have the time to address those issues right there, because there is some question about, did we follow the plan prioritized projects the way it's initially said? So Paul Agnello said we did not do that, right? So all we're going to do is find out, did we follow the process or we did not follow the process? Let's take the extra 30 days, the staff can get together to make it happen. We can vote on these two critical ones, then we can move forward and then this should be not a big deal. Because again, as Matt, as you said more than one time, you're bringing those to us the first time without discussion and asking us to vote on it. So we're having the discussion. It needs to come back at the next meeting. We can vote on the full package.
I'm sure
Mr. Ross.
The policy committee can do whatever it wishes. The only comment I would make is that a large number of the questions are about the CMAQ SDBG prioritization policy and the interpretation. It's not that nobody followed the set policy. It's that, for example, the policy doesn't clarify exactly what it means by a new project. So we have to make an assessment because the policy is silent. So there is a long list of things which are questions where the policy doesn't tell you exactly how to make that decision. It's not a great policy, I have to be honest.
Well, I mean, that's a great point.
Right. But it's not
Before
going to
we
be
rush forward into something that we don't agree with, we should fix the policy.
Sure, but the policy is not going to be fixed in the next 30 days.
Yeah.
Well, at least it can be addressed.
So with that, so with that being said, I'm wondering, I don't know, I feel like we've seen some of this stuff over the last year. It's not all a total surprise. And I do mean that in the utmost respect. But I'm wondering, I totally understand where you're coming from, Supervisor McLaughlin. So I'm wondering if we could maybe move this stuff forward and then maybe put on the next agenda, maybe June, July, to readdress that policy, look at where some of the gaps are now that we've seen it in regards to the implementation process and where some of the holes are, and then look at providing some of those guidance criteria so that we don't have this issue in the future.
By far, the bulk of the money is parked, as you can see in FY27 and in the regionally significant projects, because we didn't want to allocate it. The rest of the projects, I mean, it's up to the policy committee whether they want to park those as well, that new money as well. It's entirely up to you. But the policy is not going to get fixed in 30 days if you want to fix the policy. And the policy is silent on a number of the questions that are being asked of us. And honestly, we've either followed what was done last time. When it's silent, we follow what was done last time, or we've made what looked to us a sensible approach to that gap in the policy.
Mr. Keller.
Well, I think most of the money is being parked, and that would take the discussion. So I agree with you, because the projects that are being funded and being done are projects that we've talked about for years. This is not something new coming forward. These are all projects that we've done for a long time. I would have to say it's interesting that the person who has been in charge of putting this policy together in the first place is now the one who's questioning it moving forward, which is a little, and again, talking about timing, dropping something as has happened in the past and said we're trying to get away from, just before a meeting to say, well, we're not going to ask questions now, right before the meeting occurs. And frankly, I'm not saying they're not legitimate questions, but the fact of the matter is what we're currently allocating is fine. We're holding most of the money back, and you can have a conversation and deal with that later on. So I have no problem if you want to make a motion to move forward what we got on the understanding that we are going to review the policy.
Before we make a motion, I'd like to recognize Mr. Wells.
Mark's been trying to talk for a while.
Well, I would just say that since the person asking the questions about policy was the guy that created it, maybe he's got some legitimate things. I don't think he asked them right before this meeting. I think they were asked at the TAC. And they said, well, we're the policy committee, we're not the TAC. So I don't know how long ago did the TAC meet. But Matt's trying to bring it up as something that he just asked tonight. He did not.
We met twice in the last month. The last one was about a week ago.
Okay, so it's not something that was just brought up, and it's by the guy who developed it. Sorry, I'm sure I have the floor, right? Is that okay? Yeah, I certainly don't interrupt you. So I would just bring up that, yeah, you're making some good points. Maybe we should work through these questions from the guy that actually is questioning that we're following the policy by the guy that wrote the policy. Good point, Matt. And
Well, he's certainly in your gonna.
yes, but why not sort those things out? Because the other thing I'm concerned about, and it's been brought up several times, is the precedent that this is setting. Because I've heard you say, this is the way we've always done it. This is the way we've always done it several times. So how about we fix the way we're doing it now? Let's pass the things that are on the board that have to be passed, but let's sort this out now and not kick the can down the road. This committee, in my experience, is famous for kicking the can down the road, AKA, I think the MOU is still outstanding, kicking the can down the road. But anyway, that was throwing it out there.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. I would like to recognize Mr. Dudenheffer. Supervisor.
I would like, I think right away, we ought to clear the table of the items that have to be done. Okay, so I would move that we do a staff recommend and TAC recommends on the items for the
86,000.
86 and the 35. We get within a one motion.
You can do that. We also need to reduce the FY22 allocation by the 7,000 some odd dollars because we are not allowed to have a negative balance. So those
Can you say
three,
7,000 some odd dollars?
Some of that are somewhat out. In other words,
those
move
three items.
the three items that are critical that I move that we go ahead and execute based on that.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? Okay.
Can I have just a question? I mean, I'm trying to figure out where we're going because are we going to have a potential another vote on the rest of it or? Are we, okay, then I'll follow.
Yes.
Okay, potential another vote on it.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions?
Can we just read who proposed and who seconded so that we can put it?
Proposed.
Second.
Proposed by Dudenheffer and seconded by, okay, we've got that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Motion passes. Let's go on to the additional discussion. Mr.
Okay.
Dudenheffer.
I guess I don't know how many times, David, we've been over this with the, the technical end of it. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, your guy is the one guy that can, let's say manipulate, he's probably watching and saying.
He is. That's the question.
But I mean, how, we will always, I can guarantee you, if whatever you guys come up with, there'll probably be recommendations by our staff who feels that they got shorted on. And so that the TAC and the staff worked on trying to give the best solution that we can possibly have. And I'm not sure what we accomplished by moving forward.
Well, I'll just say.
By pushing it another arm.
I think what I would recommend is that Paul could get with you, because I don't think the questions that they asked were answered, whether they're detailed, like I think Tim brought up before, or and detailed is good, right? So, and give them a month to work it out, and if they can't, then let's just pass it. But if we could at least get to the bottom of what that issue is, I think it'd be worthwhile.
Okay, is there any issue with delaying a month? But technically, are we missing something? Is there something we're not going to do based on that?
So technically, what we have to do is do one of two things. You either have to approve the list in your pack, or we still have to have an approved list for VDOT. So,
but on what time?
Now, I don't know what the exact date is.
So VDOT needs this approved tonight.
Yes, but what you can do, I'm just gonna be honest, I have no dog in this fight, right? It's not my money, it doesn't come to my road, so I have no dog in this fight.
Where do you live? We need your address.
We need full disclosure.
So I'm gonna on purpose buy a house outside of FAMPO. I can't do this because I don't care. But let me tell you this, you have two options. You either do that, approve one, or you take the new money that was allocated for FY27, well, for the new term, which we allocated to those three projects. I think it's three projects. and you push it into, Adam, is it FY27?
Yes, the balance entry.
Yes, so we either put it, so those are your two options. You don't vote on nothing, either push the money to a balanced entry so that it's not allocated to Onville Road and the amount for the bus for etc. Or you allocate the one that's there, because that will be the same thing, right? So instead of the allocating to the projects which Pennsylvania isn't happy with, you push it into a balanced entry, or you decide to approve it as is. So if you put it in a balanced entry, it means we're not allocating any to the projects. It's piling it up in a balanced entry so that whatever needs to happen needs to happen.
Mr. Kelly asked first. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's, I guess, just to Mark's point, if I can stress a little more, staff, okay, what is being asked is a policy decision. Again, we went through this recently to get to where we are in these allocations on the projects, which we've been talking about for a lot of years. My question would be, to your point, is what's the end game? Because staff has already said it's going to be months before they're going to be able to answer and come up. And I think staff wants to work up with a more tight policy on CMAQ. But why do we want to hold up these projects for months if that's the object of what we want to do here to get answers to these questions? Why not just allocate these funds now on the understanding that staff is going to have to work on these questions, because we've still got a huge pot of money we haven't allocated yet. And we can allocate it under the new policy, whatever that may be, with a bigger chunk of money. But now we're talking about pushing all our projects over to answer these questions.
So just two things, one quick. At the beginning meeting, there was only 2 critical projects. And all of a sudden, the entire list is critical and must be passed tonight.
No, so all that we're saying is, if you don't want to pass that list, that's fine. Just put the money that was going to be put to those projects in FY27 so that we have an approved list to get rid of. So it's not.
You're pushing
that needs the list tonight?
Well, not tonight, but
when do they need the list?
Susan, are you online?
I am online. I need to finalize by May 28th.
Sorry?
I'm going to need it finalized by May 28th. I have to have everything completed by June 4th. And then they central office starts the QA/QC on June 4th. They'll pull it on June 18th for the CTB. And then the CTB meeting will approve it on June 23rd. Also taking consideration, y'all also have the 5307 funds. So that needs to be approved. So I can start working with DRPT, advising them that the CMAQ funds are coming off those projects and 5307 funds are going on those projects. So that's also something that I have to work through this whole entire process.
Yes, so I understand where you're coming from, but were you on this call when we discussed that there were only 2 critical issues at the beginning of this meeting that were time sensitive?
Yes, sir, I was.
Well, you know, in the future, I would ask you to say, Madam Chair, there's more than just that. We need this too. And so we could have that up front instead of at this time of meeting. Would that make sense?
Yes, sir. I'll be more than happy to do that for you.
We could sit here and argue all
Yeah,
action
I mean, with
now,
what
and
I
we
just heard,
unfortunately, we don't have control over what VDOT does, okay? So in this case, I'm gonna make the motion that we accept the list as is. But that we go back and address the issues that Paul's come up with and see if there's any ramifications or legitimate issues. I'm not saying they're not, or I can. I know Paul has kind of a technical, I can tell you, my staff believes that we should go forward with this list. Okay, so that is my motion.
Second.
But a point of order, shouldn't we have to rescind our previous order?
No.
We don't have to, we can just go forward? Okay, thank you.
You have
Right.
input.
So on this, and again, I guess my frustration is that there's been question, at least from our staff, about the process. You know, we believe that the policy's jacked up, right? Not a problem there. We're not going to take the time to go back and evaluate why or what we missed in this thing. Probably more concern is that all of a sudden we found out tonight, the first time we saw this list together, it must be passed tonight or the world's going to end. We shouldn't be running a board like that. That's how stuff gets screwed up. And that's how you end up wasting money. And that's, as we move forward with this, and it's not a great deal of money, but it sets a precedent. If we're going to act like this in the future, when there's more money and real money applied to it, we're going to make more mistakes. And other people are going to get shortchanged from the outset.
I understand. We have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
A second.
Just a big clarification, Tim. I mean, I understand what you're saying. Matt's made those same comments in the past. It seems to kind of ebb and flow back and forth on how this all works. I'd say that we need to be conscious and do our best not to do those kinds of things. And, but at this point, I think the time sensitivity has been past this. But I'm willing to, I don't know the technical end of it. And I could, I'll have to put Jason with Paul and they are, and the guy from the city, and they work out where this is. But I can tell you right now, our guys are saying, no, it's not. So.
Chair recognizes Mr. Hill.
I just want to, and we'll ask anybody who's listening or here to correct me if I'm incorrect. One, these are not the first time we've seen these projects. We can't bring these projects forward unless they're in our long-range plan. That's one. Two, all the jurisdictions were specifically asked at the staff level to bring their top projects forward. So these projects came from staff, from your staff, and from our staff. So to kind of imply that somehow this is something new and different that just totally caught us off guard is not quite correct.
Well, I think the packaging of it is what they're saying, and the sensitivity of the timeline is what they're talking about. So I don't think it's helpful to Matt to get into that back and forth at this point, okay? So my motion stands, I call the question.
Thank you. Having called the question, all who approve say aye.
Aye.
Any nays?
No.
They're doing ayes.
Those are two ayes.
Did
One
somebody
nay
say
is-
no up here?
The nay is Mr. McLaughlin. All right.
Yeah, we'll record that.
Any abstentions? Motion passes. I did want to make a comment that on the agenda, you'll notice that I changed it before I realized I was going to be late to have the chairman comments, and that was specifically what I was going to talk about the last minute changes that are coming to us and how dramatic it is for us all to have to respond. And I'm dismayed by that, but I also recognize that some of this we have to react to, and it's our policies and our processes don't do it. I did want to also put on the record that we did make a comment that we would like to still go back and look at the comments that were made and reconcile those between the three jurisdictions.
Chair, if I can just make 2 points. The first one is that the BDOT numbers, you saw the dates there. They changed at the last minute for us. So it wasn't staff that was doing this at the last minute. We got those emails on those dates, and we can show you the emails. We got them very late, and we were told, yeah, you must change. So, and that wasn't even the district office. I think, Richmond. So it's not us that has put you under pressure. Believe me, I can show you the emails. The second thing is, I think we acknowledge as staff as well that we're in a difficult spot, because while the LRTP prioritization methodology we've helped design, and it's a good one, and it's in your pack, it's got a lot of detail. The CMAQ one is very old, and it has got holes you can drive a bus through. So I can't answer some of the questions that are being asked because the policy says a big fat zero about how to define what is a new project, for example. I can't define it for you because the policy doesn't tell me. So I need to put on the agenda when we can, because we can't do everything at once with 6 staff, but we need to put on the agenda reviewing the CMAQ policy because it has these big holes, and we can't answer the questions, some of them that are being asked of us, because the policy is completely silent, which means you either fall back on last year's process, however flawed that is, or you try to use your common sense and go, what did they mean by this? It's like interpreting a religious Bible. You have to try and guess, what did the guy mean? It's difficult. I'll be honest, my staff, I think, have tried really hard, but there's some gray areas in that policy. It's not a good policy. It's very old.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hollis. Yes, Mr.
I want to acknowledge what David said. I mean, I was under the impression that the first of this meeting, we had 2 items that were critical.
Apologies, that's my mistake. VDOT corrected me that actually we also have to have a complete list approved. Whether we push the money out into the future, as I proposed, as the alternative, or whether you accept that one, that was your decision. But we did have to have a completed list, and I should have made that clear. That one I'll take responsibility for. That's my mistake. I be clear about that. I apologize.
We came dangerously close to deferring it, so that would have been a disaster.
Well, I did bring it back to you and
Yeah,
say,
you
no,
did.
we do need to do that. So I apologize for that one. That was my error.
Right. But you can see there's some contentious issues here that have a very long train on them that we need to be a little more careful.
And I do agree with those who say that the policy needs to be fixed. I agree with that completely. It's really difficult to interpret it.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item H4, resolution 2129 on, again, this is $17,000 for CMAQ to the lease commuter parking places project. It's an action item.
This again is a historical project that's grandfathered in. So we get it at a better rate, I think. I can't remember the details. Adam, do you want to just give us the details on that?
Sure, I'm happy to. So this goes back to 2009. This is a project that's been in the area for a long time. We're able to use CMAQ funds to lease spaces, which is the most cost-effective way of leasing spaces in the region. So we don't have to build a new commuter lot, each time we need spaces. So this allocates the 17,000 that's been slated for FY22 into the budget for this program.
And you can see the locations at where those parking spaces are.
Yeah, and I had some questions about this. Has anyone driven by any of the commuter lots lately? Even with coming out of COVID and whatever, I can tell you this, the commuter lot that Stafford County put an extra $4 or $5 million in to add another several hundred parking places to it is at best, it's less than half full every day or whatever. So my question would be, is it wise for us to allocate money to these parking places when we have significant empty spaces that are existing now that we've already paid? I mean, this isn't a lot of money.
I believe the TAC recommended this because it is one that's grandfathered in for some reason. Adam, could you just explain that? This is something that's been around for a long time. Obviously, with COVID, there's going to be a lot of empty lots.
Sure, this is not something that we could, as far as my understanding, we could not choose to do this again. This is something that is, because it's continuous since before the policy change by FHWA in 2009, we're allowed to do it. It's a small amount of money in the big picture of what it costs for, improving the commute in our region. So we do believe that this is vitally important despite the fact that we're still in COVID-19.
So we will not get these places back for this amount of money if we
can't
terminate.
So, Madam Chair. So a question, I brought this up pretty much every year, and in the past, you've given us the usage rates that you tell us that, there's 80% occupancy, these commuter spaces or whatever. I think these are commercial lots that you're renting at whatever the price may be. But my frustration all along is that we're again, part of the free ride, right? People that are using a lot are getting a commuter ban, and they're getting a government subsidy, whether it's from the federal government or potentially from their employer. But most federal government employees use a van, get the ride sub %. And what we're doing is we're subsidizing their parking space on top of their subsidized ride. And again, I don't think we should be doing that, particularly after we've built all these other commuter lots out there. And as Mr. Dudnak was saying, a lot of them are empty at this point. And I do understand if you're going to say that one of these lots are out in more rural areas. Well, that's what the competition's about. But yet $17,000 here, $30,000 there, $50,000 there. Again, real money, taxpayer money, not going to infrastructure, going to, help somebody out, probably making a fairly good wage on a government job.
One
Madam Chair?
question is how long, 17,000, how long does that buy us?
I think it's annual.
Like 22, that's a year?
It's an annual. Is it an annual, Adam? I think it's annual. It's
Yes,
based on the line.
This is an annual.
So it would start on July the 1st, it would be a fiscal year like that.
Councilman Kelly, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, just to remind everybody, originally this number was a lot higher because we had this discussion before, and we asked staff to go back and check the lots, and we basically cut the allocation in half to get it to where we're at now.
What I've asked in the past as well, why don't we sell a tag that people can buy for the offset the cost, and they can hang it in their window and they can park in that place for free.
Madam Chair.
Let
Those are
Jason
all
go. and then
subsidized.
I'll go.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Grant.
All right, thank you. I mean, look, yes, it's a small amount of money, but is it real money? Yes. But to Mr. McLaughlin's point, I believe, one, this is an insurance policy for post-COVID. Number two is, while it may look like an individual subsidy in your eyes, I will also believe that it reduces the amount of wear and tear by reducing the number of vehicles on 95, which can end up actually being cost effective in that regard. And furthermore, it does provide more incentive to get people out of their private vehicles and into, transit or ride share, which can end up reducing everyone's time spent on 95. So I do think that there are benefits to the population at large, even if we have to do it in this way. So I don't necessarily agree that this is just a handout with no benefit whatsoever. I think there are a lot of benefits for a relatively small amount of money.
Thank you. Supervisor Nuke.
So I agree with Mr. McLaughlin, and he brought up a good point. I don't know if everybody heard him, but I was also curious about doing stickers or, I don't know, little tags that you hang from your mirror, or even requiring the commuter vans. Because when I drive by them, all I see are the commuter vans sitting there. And some of them aren't even in service, and they're just taking up spots. Like, why can't they just take them every day home and then bring them back in the morning for the different shifts that they have the commuters? So and I've even driven by during the day, and a lot of the commuter vans that aren't full are just sitting there empty, holding up spaces that people could go and park in. So are we then offsetting those commuter vans again by then paying for $17,000 worth of spaces at Food Lion for people who are actually needing to commute? So I support Mr. McLaughlin on this, and I don't think I'll be supporting this resolution. Anyway.
Madam Chair, do you want at least a motion to get it going? I'll move 2129.
Thank you, sir. Have a motion to move. Do I have a second? Not here in second. It's done for a lack of.
Can someone from the same locality second?
No.
I don't think so.
I can't second the motion.
I mean, I look at this as like, a light goes to.
Can I ask you, since that died, so I have a question, and really, this is more go back to staff, because you still have time if you can implement something. But again, the other thing I want to bring up about all these vans, those are businesses. The people running the vans are making money. Why don't we charge the van, if he has an 8-passenger van, charge them whatever the prorated price is to rent those spaces, so we can actually, recoup some of this taxpayer money? Because again, business is getting free advertisement from this organization, they're getting free parking, and they're making money off the taxpayers. So asking them to give a little back, I don't think it's a whole lot. So I would ask, because this motion failed, the staff go back and look at options, whether the van pool pay for the stickers, or there's an allocation for their tags, or the individual riders buy a monthly pass or something, allows them to hang there and park for free. Because I think it's time for people to take some responsibility.
But they still need the spaces, and we'd have to have the spaces to give.
Well, you have time.
They don't need.
We don't know what it's going to look like. My husband works for the federal government, and he's not going to go back to work. They are, and now they're even recruiting people that they've never been able to recruit in their lives from like Florida and Georgia and South Carolina. They're hiring people that were DC-based positions, and they're saying, you don't have to move here anymore. You can live where you're at. And they're actually saving money because they're paying them a lower salary for the difference in cost of living. So I think we need a year to figure it out. And I agree with Mr. McLaughlin, and I would really like for us to have that on the agenda next meeting or whatever.
I wanted to say my analogy is like my wife goes and shops. She said, well, I was on sale. I said, well, we don't need it, but I got a good price.
Yeah. And I would add that not everybody used to work from home, because most people that I know actually have classified data that they work with, and they have to go.
It's coming. And I don't.
It's coming because they're going to buy regional skips. They're going to start doing leases with regional localities to implement skips, so people don't have to.
I understand there's some agencies I know that will not participate in that, but that doesn't matter. We're not, that's here or there. Moving on. Item number HI.
Did we vote on that?
We already voted.
Okay, so we're just not doing it.
It
Okay, got
died.
It died, and Mr. Hollis is going to put it on the agenda next time for a discussion about tags and commuter parking lots.
I will ask the GWI Connect and the TAC to come up with proposals. I don't know what those are right now, but.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question real quick before we
Please,
go off
Mr.
that?
Kelly, my apologies.
So this is part of our allocation, goes to the state, that has to be approved. So we've killed it, so goes out this year no matter what we do. So if you come back and say, hey, we can do a program, but we still think we need the spaces, can we still do
We
it?
can't get this money for this set of parkings again if we don't roll it over again this year, because it's I believe, Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that this particular kind of use for this amount of money is not any longer an option. So this is around because it was grandfathered in that we could use CMAQ funding at this rate for this project, and we were allowed to continue it because it existed under a prior regime. I don't think, am I correct in saying that this option is no longer available if we want to restart it in a year's time?
Yeah, then we'd have to go a year, yeah, we couldn't do it on a regular basis, that's right.
That is my understanding. I would defer to FHWA and VDOT though.
So we're just getting out of the business.
Like everything that needs
We'll
CMAQ.
rent at Walmart if food line won't go.
We used 5307.
Or all
Okay.
these computer lots of things.
Are there any additional discussions on resolution 2129, or we're going to move on
You
to
could say that we're
the
using
Okay, the chair said let's move on, so.
Okay, let's move on to item I, the 2050 LRTP update. This is also an action item, I1, for the project prioritization methodology for LRTP.
Yeah, Madam Chair, this document is the summary of all the bits that you've been seeing. Okay, so this is the final putting together of the roadway prioritization methodology, the transit prioritization methodology and TDM, the bike and ped prioritization methodology, how we're going to deal with all the issues around that and putting it together in one document for you. That's what this is. So we sent this out early this month. You've had a week of it, not just the 3 days notice we're required usually to give. It's been through the TAC. The TAC did unanimously approve it. We're asking for your support.
Supervisor Leonard.
I move for resolution 21-31.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? All who approve, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes.
That's not called 20, I beg your pardon, Chair, that's not called 2131. That's just approving the LRTP prioritization methodology. So I just want to clarify just.
No, I think Mark did.
I did that.
Oh,
What is-
okay.
what is it?
It's just approving the FAMPO LRTP
2050
project
long range
prioritization.
transportation. There's no resolution attached.
It's the
You have to
prioritization
approve the
methodology.
document.
It's
Okay.
the document.
So I'm sorry, then I amend my motion to approve the 2050 long range transportation plan.
Second.
Second. Going to do it again.
Just,
Just
yeah.
ask if anyone.
I just found my second.
Aye.
Tired.
All who oppose, say nay. Any abstentions? Motion passes again.
Thank you. Now we can do the LRTP amendment. Now these next items, Chair, these are all the public hearings. We had the public hearing. We got 2 comments. We read the comments. They were actually both in favor. So the next items you could go boom, boom, boom through, or we could ask staff to present them. The staff are here. We have the documents. We're ready to roll. But they are all the public hearings on the administrative amendments, which you all know about.
I move to approve J, wait.
What?
Resolution.
Yeah, now it's what Mark said. R 21-31.
Supervisor Menucha moves for 2131. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any additional discussion? All who approve, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Next item is resolution 21-30.
So move.
Thank you. Second. Thank you. Motion is second. All who approve, say, I'm sorry, any discussion?
You the second.
All who approve, say aye.
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 Any nays? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Next item on the agenda is resolution 2132.
So
Do I have a
moved.
motion? Thank you. The supervisor Menucha, a motion. Second.
Second.
Thank you for a motion and second. Any discussion? All who approve, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Any abstentions? Thank you. Next item on the agenda is FY '22 UPWP update. That's resolution 21-33.
This is our new work program for the new year, but it's been in your pack. It's been out for public comment. You know all about it.
Do you have a motion for 21?
So moved.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, please. Do you have a second?
Second.
Okay,
This is
thank
the
you. Now,
Which one is
Mr. McCollum.
The Unified Planning Board.
UPWP, right?
Supervisor McCollum, I recognize you.
Does this have the language that we can go ahead and, do you ever see your FAMPO so we can actually modify our MOUs, MOAs?
Yes.
Yes.
Who said yes?
Adam,
Adam.
Because I don't want to go through this ridiculousness again, that we can't make an administrative change within our documents because it's some BS. So all of that's covered in this document, correct?
Yes, sir.
If you want to vastly amend the document, you've got to have a public hearing.
We can modify our,
It should have been included, what he said.
Yeah.
We, back before you got here, we.
Adam says yes.
Okay.
are you highlighting something there?
He's highlighting that we'll be able to do that.
Maintain and update FAMPO committee bylaws as appropriate and with adequate public notice per bylaws requirements.
So it's open-ended if we change it. All right,
Okay.
thank you very
All
much.
right.
Have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? All approve, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Any abstention? Motion passes. Correspondence. I believe we have 2 items of correspondence, or was that covered earlier?
I have some good news.
Okay.
The TPB MOU, they voted it through last night.
Woo!
You
Yay!
don't have to change, edit, talk about it ever again. It's done.
Well, we will because it, we're going to.
Yeah, well, if the TMA changes, we will, but I'm just saying that it's done. You can cross that off. We don't have to deal with it again.
Well, just for the record, Matt has been predicting it's going to change for years and years. So we'll see what happens.
Yes.
Looks like it's going to.
It looks like it's going to change, that's for sure. Do we have any additional reports? Hearing none, I'll move on to board member comments. Do we have any board members that wish to make a comment? Or committee members that need to make a comment? Hearing none, I'd like to adjourn the meeting. Our next committee meeting will be June 21st, 2021 at 6 p.m. Thank you all for your participation through this trying time of changes that it's very hard for us to adapt to.
And just, Madam Chair, point of clarification before we all leave. On the 21st, are we all going to be in person? Because I'm pretty sure the governor's declaration of emergency is expired by then.
That was my question.
That's a good point. Yes, we will be in person.
Okay.
Unless something changes and we're allowed to be in person, we're expected to be here.
Okay.
All right, thank you,
No
ma'am.
dialing. All right,
Thank you
great.
for bringing that up.
Thank you, Madam
All
Chair.
right.
And thank you, everybody, for a long meeting. We appreciate your inputs.
Chairman, comments make that same statement. We have to put an end to this stuff.
You should have. You should have. I would have been okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the things I was going to talk about with all this.
Chair, I've got to send you a before I'm going to bed. I've got to send you a letter.